Excerpt from the diary of the Honourable Lady Mahon, compiled in 1956 when she was 78.
Mrs. Dent was a great character, a tall, gaunt woman in a grey dress in the morning, black in the afternoon, a small piece of lace laid on top of her smooth grey hair. She was very strong on the temperance movement. She induced the aunts and mother to take it up. Several of them took the pledge. They missed their glasses of beer at lunch and worked hard for the cause in the parish. Mrs. Dent, with a still room maid under her, made all the cakes, scones and jams. She had charge of the linen and curtains, covers, etc. in all the rooms. She always spoke her mind. She once called an architect who annoyed her about a chimney an old jackass, and said if Mr. Dillon could lend her a pair of trousers, she would go up the chimney herself. She was very kind to us. We occasionally had tea with her and the upper servants in the housekeeper's room. The upper and under servants had breakfast, tea and supper in the housekeeper's room and servants' hall respectively. At dinner they all sat together in the servants' hall for the meat course, eaten in silence in case the unders should presume to mix in the uppers' conversation. The meat eaten, the grandees processed into the housekeeper's room for their pudding. When Mrs. Dent in the early 1880s retired to her home at Darlington, she for many years sent us large boxes of sweets every Christmas. Not long before I married, she sent me a small rooted fig tree she had grown. She sent it, she said, more for the curiosity like than for the sake of the fruit. It was one of the large fig trees now, in 1956, on the wall in the corner of the garden at Castlegar. A flat green leather clock I always use. She sent me as a wedding present. It is the only one given to me then that still keeps perfect time. In 1884, Mother, helped by the aunts, undertook to improve the chancel of a Haskell church. She and all the aunts, except Aunt Fanny, carved the reredos, of which the present one is a replica. The pillars for it were turned by my father. A red kneeler with a design of gold-coloured leaves was embroidered for the communion rails by some ladies in the parish, including Aunt Fanny. My sister Georgie, her German governess, Fräulein von Bieberstein, and I think either Aunt Helen or Aunt Georgie. An older cloth was also embroidered, probably by Aunt Katie, and a fall for the pulpit desk by Aunt Fanny. Parquet flooring was put down. The walls were coloured dark blue, and Mother painted as a narrow frieze in gold lettering the words, "Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us." She was surprised and delighted, while all this was going on, to get a cheque for £25 from John Ross Mahon to help with the expenses. Their work was finished for the Easter service of 1885. It was all destroyed when the church was maliciously burnt in 1922. I do not remember exactly what the stables consisted of before reductions had to be made. After them there was kept a coachman and groom in livery, and 2 or 3 stable boys, 3 big carriage horses, a pair of cobs, one of which Aunt Georgie sometimes rode. Georgie and Robin's ponies, Beauty and Bluebell, and a little pony, Rosie, for the pony carriage. Later we had a pony to ride, Blackie, and a donkey called Someday to drive in our little car, a miniature Irish car built by Moat by Uncle Charlie Crofton and O'Killeen the carpenter. The carriages were the bus, the Clarence, a large shut carriage with a little outside dicky at the back, the landau, the wagonette, 2 Irish cars, and a little pony carriage. Later the Clarence was abandoned. A Victoria was got for Grandpapa to drive in when he was very old. Later still a brougham was bought. The stable boys slept in the stables. An old woman, Mary Manning, walked 2 miles from Strathana every day to make the boys' beds. The boys also included 2 or 3 garden men who lived in the bothy in the garden. Mary Manning was to us always rather mysterious, silent figure. We never talked to her and never saw her talking to anyone else. She always wore black with, winter and summer, a big black shawl over her head, because we were told she had once tried and failed to be a nun. I have no very clear remembrance of any special happenings during the next few years. When Georgie's governess left in 1885, Georgie taught us. She came up to the nursery at about 10 every morning and gave us regular lessons. Geography, history, French, etc., which lasted about 2 hours. We hated lessons, and she hated teaching us. But that couldn't be helped, and we all got on very well together. She and our parents had 2 very nice trips to Switzerland in the summer of 1887 and 1889. In other summers they went to London, and we usually stayed with Mammy at lodgings in Salt Hill, Galway. The house was called Elmview, the people Tarpey, and we and Mammy became very friendly with them. We loved our time there and were very sorry to go home, sometimes to an empty, echoing house, no carpets on the stairs or passages or halls, house cleaning going on. Sometimes 2 or 3 aunts there, which were worse than anything. If it was Aunt Helen and Aunt Katie's turn to be at home, Aunt Helen thought it her duty to give us lessons. If Aunts Fanny, Louisa and Georgie, Aunt Fanny taught us. The bright spots were heaps of lovely strawberries, tea, sometimes at the farm with Mrs. Hay, and often drives with Aunt Helen and Aunt Louisa in the little pony carriage. These drives were usually to cottages at Kilglass, Strathona or Lurgan to see the old mother or sick child of some tenant. They took perhaps a cross-over crochet shawl, of which she, aunts and mother made dozens in the course of a year, and often a milk pudding carried in a little container which could in those days be bought for the purpose, a jam pot fitting in a wicker basket with a lid and a handle. I remember Aunt Helen taking a basket of strawberries to some special favourite. Tenants' wives often came up to the house to ask for things they needed. An old housemaid, Mary Ann, who left Clonbrock after over 20 years' service, writing to describe her new situation to my mother, said it was a good Christian household, like his lordship's, prayers and people standing on the hall doorsteps. Years later, when the aunts lived in their own houses and we, grown-ups, stayed with them, on more or less equal terms, we got to know and appreciate and love the 4 who were then left, but in the days I'm writing about, I must confess we did not. Aunt Fanny was always very kind to us, gave us presents, and would have liked to be friends with us, if she had known how, but she didn't. Aunt Helen we were always rather afraid of. She was rather sharp, inclined to scold, or so we thought. Aunt Louisa and Georgie did not trouble their heads about us. Aunt Katie was the only one we were comfortable with. She liked anything small and young. She sometimes took us out. Once when we were whacking the heads off thistles, she asked me, which king of England had his head cut off with one blow? I had no idea how many kings had been beheaded, or how many blows it usually took. I was most surprised that my wild shot, Charles, was right. Long afterwards, when I reminded her of the question, she said, "Dear me, that doesn't sound like me. I wonder I knew the answer myself." They all had their various interests at home. If Aunt Fanny had lived in those days, she would probably have taken a teacher's job. She must have loved teaching women and children. She had a Bible class for the maids in the house and any young women on the place every Sunday at 6 o'clock in her bedroom. She must have done it very well. They all attended and liked it. She also had a Bible reading once a week at Mrs. Tom Hunt's house, Milverton, for women in the parish. I do not know who went to it. The Cairns and Elliots always certainly did. When she left Clonbrock in 1894, she was presented with the Bible by the people who were attending her readings for so many years. Aunt Helen's chief work, outside of housekeeping and looking after tenants, was the church music. She and her musical sisters went to practice in the church every Friday, and on Sunday evening at 6 p.m. The singing was held in the hall. Aunt Helen, of course, at the organ, when the hymns and chants for the next days were sung. She and Aunt Louisa and Aunt Georgie, and later our sister Georgie, all taught in Sunday schools, held in the laundry on Sunday mornings. Their mother had started a Sunday school at the mill, and they carried it on there for years, but I never remembered anywhere but at the laundry. During all these years, Aunt Louisa was fully occupied with her pets, her plants, and her pony carriage drives. Aunt Georgie deputised for Aunt Helen when she was away with her painting, Aunt Katie with her carving and needlework. They were all great walkers and used nearly always to go out separately, each her own way. They were all very fond of flowers and liked Aunt Fanny and Aunt Louisa especially, looking after their window boxes and pot plants in their bedrooms. They never worked in the garden. Mackenzie, the Scottish head gardener, who had then been at Clonbrock since the early 60s, would hardly have allowed it.